Welcome to Frickety Frack. We do talk back. Thank you for joining us in this episode.
Hello, my name is Jeff, and I'm Frick.
Hello, my name is Patrick, and I'm Frack. Frickety Frack, We Do Talk Back is a show where we discuss different aspects of fandom and how they relate to the gospel. And so we are going through the Prime Video series Invincible and connecting lessons from each episode to teachings in the Bible. And just as many of you are, we are also fans of other things as well. So when we finish with Invincible, we're going to go in a different direction, and we'll look at anything ranging from anime, comics, video games, movies, or just about anything that we're fans of. And we've got the name of our show from our father who dubbed us Frick and Frack since we were kids. And so we're doing Invincible, and Invincible is pretty special to Jeff and I. And so, Jeff, why don't you tell me why you're wanting to do Invincible?
Well, for me, it's pretty simple. Invincible is really what turned me into a true comic collector, as in terms of the comic book series. Because up until then, really, in all honesty, the only things that I really collected in terms of comic books at the time was mostly, really, in all honesty, mostly just Spider-Man. And by the time that I really got into Invincible and drew me into Invincible, I was probably really only collecting Spider-Man and the Green Lantern books at the time. So I didn't have a really diverse taste in comics at this point. And I actually do need to give Patrick the kudos, because he's the one that actually turned me on to Invincible. And so from there, and at one point I did actually own
You're
every
welcome.
single individual issue of Invincible. I've had to sell a few of them just because at a couple different times, when I got a little tight, and unfortunately, early Invincible issues in particular sell very well. So I have had to say goodbye to some of my earlier issues of Invincible. But to me, what's so special about the series is that, like I said, it's the first thing that really kind of kicked off and turned me from just a comic enthusiast to a true comic book collector. And then on top of it too, one of the things that, and you can talk to, if you were to meet some of my friends that I have turned on to comic book reading or collecting, one of the things that I generally encourage everybody to read, especially if they're into superheroes, is to read Invincible. And so one of the things that, and you know, it's like, and even though with the people that have asked me at different points to like what they should read or anything like that, you can't give a blanket suggestion to everybody. It's like, oh yeah, you have to read this no matter what. No, it might not be their taste. Especially today's comic book market, there is literally a comic book genre for just about anything you come up with. In fact, one of my favorite comic book series also is called The Sixth Gun, which merges Western and fantasy. And so it's just so like if you can come up with that genre, then it's like, there's a genre out there for everybody. Invincible is one of the closest books that I have that I suggest to everybody, just about everybody, because the great thing about Invincible is that even if you're not a fan of superhero comic books, you'll probably like Invincible, because Invincible takes some of the very overdone comic book tropes and turns them on their head. And then sometimes it plays right directly into the comic book trope. And so it's just something that it's a comic book that just about everybody can enjoy. And so it's something that, like I said, if you're looking to try out a comic book and you're wanting to read something superhero, but maybe you're kind of a little tired of Marvel or DC, you need to give Invincible a try.
And
So,
so,
Patrick, why Invincible for you?
so for me, I've mentioned it a few times on the show, but I haven't really talked about it all that much. But I used to work for a comic book store, and it was A Plus Comics and Collectibles. It was in Lexington, Kentucky. And for those of you who are familiar with Robert Kirkman, and so just as a reminder, Invincible was created by Robert Kirkman, Corey Walker, and then Ryan Otley was added was given creator credit as well. And that's a whole other story that I'm not going to get into. But for those of you who are unaware, Robert Kirkman is from the Lexington, Kentucky area. And so he was a regular patron of our store, and so so we had a lot of his material on display. So like we had the Robert Kirkman section in our store, so you could get Walking Dead, you could get Invincible, Battle Pope, Irredeemable Ant Man, his Ultimate X Men comics, all those things that you get. And so I was like, okay, well, I think what was happening was that Robert Kirkman was going to be having a signing at our store, and I was like, well, let me try Invincible and The Walking Dead because they're super popular. Um, and so I tried them out, loved them both. And obviously, I love Invincible more because it's a superhero book. Um, and so I just fell in love with the series. And so I would buy the trades as I could afford them until I could get caught up in single issues. And so I've got, Invincible stuff signed by Robert Kirkman and Corey Walker and Ryan Otley, and maybe not Corey Walker. I'm not sure. I have to look in my collection. But anywho, so I love Invincible because unlike with Marvel and DC comics, characters are allowed to marginally grow in Marvel and DC comics, and there's usually always a return to the status quo. Where Invincible, they grow, and there's stakes, and um, you never know what's going to happen, and the characters grew, learned from their mistakes, made mistakes, and they just weren't perfect, and they wouldn't go back, and you never knew who was going to be safe. And so that's one of those things that I really loved about Invincible, was that it was different, but it was still superhero stuff, so it was still really fun and colorful and action and things like that. And so it's just a really good book. And just like with Jeff, I always recommend for anyone who's like, wants to read a superhero book, I like read Invincible. And Astro City, but we're not talking about Astro City. But like read Invincible. If you're wanting to read a superhero story, read Invincible, because it is top notch quality work.
All right, so the first episode of the season is entitled "It's About Time." It opens up with two security guards of the White House discussing life in a superhero world, and when a supervillain attack occurs from the Mauler twins. Now, the Mauler twins argue about the fact that they're supposed to actually be inside the White House. They also argue as which one of them is the original. Now, when the Mauler twins are about to kill the security guards, the Guardians of the Globe arrive and thwart their plans. Now, while the Guardians struggle to evacuate the premises and fight the Mauler twins at the same time, Omni-Man arrives and tips the scales in the favor of the heroes. With everyone evacuated, Omni-Man and the Guardians of the Globe manage to defeat the Mauler twins. All right, in the Grayson home, Nolan/Omni-Man arrives from the battle and begins discussing with his wife, Debbie, where they would like to go for breakfast. And he makes mention that he wants to go to Berlin. Mark is upset that they're going to go to Berlin because he really enjoys the little restaurant that they go to there. Nolan brings up that Mark has school, and when his powers kick in, then he can go whenever he wants. He continues that even the latest bloomers on Viltrum would get their powers before their 18th birthday. Now, on Mark's way out the door to get to school, he attempts to fly by jumping up and down, and much to his chagrin, does not succeed. Now, while at school, Mark and his best friend William discuss the events at the White House and begin to overhear a bully harassing a classmate, Amber. Mark steps in to stop the harassment and gets punched in the face and the stomach, leaving him on the ground. Amber kicks the bully in the nuts, making the bully leave. Late at night, Mark is seen taking out the trash at the Burger Mart, and he is dragging 2 bags of trash and struggles to put the first one in the dumpster. When he tosses the second one, it winds up flying up into the sky, and he says, "It's about time." At the dinner table, Mark announces to his mother and father, who just got back from stopping an actual dragon attack in Hong Kong, that his powers are kicking in. Now, Nolan says he will set aside some time for training for Mark the next day. Now, while Mark struggles to sleep, he thinks back to when he's a kid and his dad explained where he came from. He explains that he comes from a planet called Viltrum, and Viltrum is similar to Earth, except that the people there can fly, travel at super speed, and have super strength. When the people of Viltrum come of age, they go out to less developed worlds and help them. Nolan relocated to Earth to be its protector, and that's where he met Mark's mother. He explains that as Mark grows and matures, he will eventually get powers just like him. Now, while thinking about this, Mark takes a step outside his bedroom window and is on the roof and attempts to fly. Uh, and he does manage to succeed and fly. However, he doesn't quite know how to control it. He winds up at the edge of the planet's atmosphere and plummets back to Earth and crashes. Nolan takes Mark out for training, and as Nolan explains how their powers work, Nolan punches Mark square in the chest. And much to Mark's surprise, it hurts him and scares him. Nolan explains if you're going to do what he does, you need to understand that the people he goes up against, they're not going to be pulling their punches either. Nolan and Mark go home. Debbie notices that Mark is upset from the training and asks if Nolan may have pushed the training too far. Nolan wonders if maybe they'd been better off if Mark just hadn't gotten his powers at all. Now, at the next day of school, the bully comes after Mark again. This time, Mark allows Todd to punch him, and each punch having less and less of an effect on Mark. As the bully runs off, Mark states he really needs to punch something. He flies out into the city in a makeshift costume, and he heads towards gunfire. Mark comes across a villain with stone skin, and they fight, and Mark comes out the winner. Nolan arrives and tells Mark that he still needs more training, and to make up for what happened earlier, Nolan takes Mark to his costume tailor. Mark wants a costume that is iconic, but doesn't know what his hero name will be just yet. Nolan and Mark are discussing why Mark is scared, and they're doing this while throwing a baseball around the planet. Nolan explains that a lot of times kids his age act recklessly because they think they're invincible. Mark needs to understand something, though. He doesn't need to be afraid because he actually is invincible. This clicks for Mark. He heads to the tailor with his idea. Mark begins to fly around in his new costume and sees a building get blown up. He arrives and fights a villain with a laser cannon for an arm. And after knocking him around for a bit, Mark tells the villain that it would be better off just giving up because he's invincible. We now go to Red Rush, seeing him. He's having a picnic date with his girlfriend, and during the conversation, he leaves to fight a villain. Now, when he comes back from stopping the villain, his girlfriend only realizes he's gone because he doesn't change back from his costume. Now, while apologizing, he and the rest of the Guardians of the Globe get alerted to an emergency. With Darkwing being the last to arrive, he admits he is not the one that called them all there. Now, in a bizarre twist, Omni-Man begins to attack the Guardians of the Globe. Initially, Omni-Man isn't very effective due to the interference from Red Rush's speed. Red Rush is caught during one of his punches on Omni-Man. Omni-Man grabs him and kills him. He then proceeds to kill the rest of the Guardians before he himself collapses.
We're going to do a couple different things with this show because the TV show is great, but there are some differences from the comics, and we're also going to talk a little bit about the voice cast as well. And so, Steven Yeun is, I do apologize, I'm probably saying that wrong, is great as Mark Grayson, and J.K. Simmons is great as Omni-Man. I was really surprised. Like, I can only think of him yelling at Mark. It's like, why don't I have pictures of Spider-Man? But it really worked for me. And so when I've gone back after watching this show and reading the Invincible comics, like I hear those two characters. And then like Sandra Oh as Debbie Grayson is phenomenal. And so it's just, and we're going to get into more of the other characters and voice actors later. But it's just really well cast, and everyone so far that we have listened to in this episode, I think is spot on for their characters. Mm-hmm. What do you think, Jeff?
Oh, I absolutely love the voice cast for this show. Just like Patrick was saying, Stephen Yoon just nails it as Mark. Um, I know there's many years ago, like just discussing with friends and coming up with a dream cast for for the show, like if they did like a live action movie. Mind you, this was probably about 10 years ago that I was kind of having these discussions, maybe even a little bit earlier. My number one choice to play Mark was actually Joseph Gordon-Levitt. And um, however, I do feel like Steven has done a phenomenal job, and he just very much embodies Mark and does a great job with that. And then on top of it too, and just J.K. Simmons is phenomenal. He's an absolutely phenomenal actor, and not only that, because it can be challenging sometimes to go back and forth. Like it's a different craft. If you were to talk to actors, it's a different craft being a voice actor and a live action actor. J.K. Simmons just knocks it out of the park regardless. He is, in my humble opinion, he is the best cast comic book character in a movie involving superheroes of all time, bar none. J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson is the absolute most perfect casting there's ever been in regards to a comic book character.
I could agree with
And
that.
then he goes and does some voice acting work. And if you haven't seen Avatar: The Legend of Korra, he's one of the main characters in that, and he's playing in his character Tenzin, and that is such a different character than than J. Jonah Jameson. Like he's this calm and empathetic and just this very caring, nurturing person. So like you don't realize it's him until you see the cast. And I was like, wait, that's J. Jonah Jameson is playing Tenzin? No. And then with him voicing Nolan, I didn't know going into when I watched Avatar: The Legend of Korra that was J.K. Simmons. I knew going into the show that Nolan was going to be voiced by J.K. Simmons, and let me tell you, if it wasn't for the fact that I knew that it was him, I probably wouldn't catch on to it either. But just absolutely phenomenal. He does such a great job embodying Nolan slash Omni Man at this stage of the character arc of just being this like really, he's got a nice strong voice, and just he's Omni Man. Like he does a great job voicing Omni Man. Now, for live action, I would probably go with Jeffrey Dean Morgan as my choice for a live action Omni Man.
Yeah, he would be really good at that.
I think he would. I think he would make a phenomenal Omni Man. Uh, However, J.K. Simmons, just voice acting wise, just absolutely nails it out of the park. And he doesn't have a big part in this episode, but Mark Hamill as Art the Tailor, just absolutely. I love any opportunity for Mark Hamill to be in something, and so the fact that Mark Hamill is lending his voice to the show, and even for a small part, is just absolutely phenomenal. I just absolutely love it.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree. And so there's a few things that are different from the show than the comic.
And so
Um,
and some of the things that we'll discuss about what's different is that it's not necessarily that it's different as it is done in a different order from the comics.
mhm.
However, but for the most part, what we're going to really kind of touch on is the things that are just different from the comics that strive very much that are very different from how it actually what happens in the comics. And guys, also please feel free for any of you that are listening if there's stuff that we missed, because I do have to fess up. It's been a little while since I've read some of Invincible. It's just been a while, and I've tried catching up, but I've got we all have so much on our plates, different things that we're trying to do and get done, and it's like, and I actually really feel like I should be rereading Invincible again, anyways, because it's such a great series. So for me, the first thing that really is different, like, and this is the thing that's the most different from the very beginning, like the thing for those of you that have read the comics, and if you're going to watch the show if you haven't already, to me the thing that's very different is William. William from the very beginning of the show is out as a homosexual. Now, what's different about William in this regard in the TV show compared to the comics is that in the comics, and it's actually funny when I did read a little bit after the show the first came out. I wanted a little bit of a refresher, and they actually set up that William is homosexual in the comics because they play him off as the extreme overcompensating type, where it's kind of like, wow, he's really trying to prove how much of a man he is or whatever. And this is like, and then like people be like, yeah, dude's probably gay. He's trying to overcompensate so much. And then it turns out in the comics, and I don't remember the exact number of when he officially comes out, but it's a ways down in down the road in the comic when William comes out as gay.
Yeah, it wasn't even until college.
Yeah, they were in college. It was yeah, man,
And well into their college time too.
Yeah, and so it was well into there before he officially came out. And so, but like I said, and from the get go from the show, William's out as homosexual. They make it very clear that he's gay, and and it's like in all honesty, I get it, and this is actually a change. Some of the when we discuss some of these changes are going to be things that I have a problem with. I like the comic version better. However, in this, I actually like the TV version better. Not that there aren't people that are like William was in the comics, where they are homosexual, and it takes them a long time to come to grips with it, and then they do come out. However, but that was the Invincible comic started coming out in like what, 2003?
Yeah, it came out in 2003.
2003. So it was a modern time, and at that time, yes, there were people in high school that were out as homosexuals. However, it is not as prevalent, and not only as prevalent, as not as well accepted as it is today, and in today's modern times, in terms of people of homosexual nature. And so I get it. I understand why they're going away from that story version to the way that they're doing it in the show. And one of the things that I will appreciate, and William's not a whole lot of this first episode. He's going to get a bigger part as the season progresses. But he's not a cliche either. Now, when you watch the first episode, he might seem to be a little bit cliched with the way that he talks about certain subjects. But as the season progresses, you understand he's actually a very well fleshed out character, and he's not just the gay best friend, which was a very common trope back in the 90s, and especially in sitcoms and stuff like that, the gay best friend or whatever. William is a genuinely fleshed out character, and he's not just it's like this one of the things that I've appreciated about more as writing has gotten more modern is that he's not just in there to fill a quote or anything like that. It's like, no, William is Mark's best friend, and he just so happens to be gay. And it's not the other way around. It's like, oh, he's gay, and so now let's make him his best friend. No, it's very much the opposite of that. So he's a real character.
Like you see that, and especially when and like we said, William's barely in this episode, but you can tell he got that deep connection where, William asks him about that. Oh gosh, what was the game thing? She was like, I want to get a level 43 chest plate or something like that. I don't even remember what it was. Clash of Clash or something like that. I can't remember.
Yeah, I don't remember what the name of the game was.
But
yeah, the name of the game was obviously something very nerdy and
and so Mark plays it, and he's like, no, it's like, man, I gotta go to work. And he's like, dude, don't even mention going to work. I mean, I've had that same conversation with friends, being like, dude, and now granted, most of my friends who worked were like, dude, do you know how expensive gas is? And I was like, well, back in high school, you and I shared a car, so it wasn't as big of a burden.
Right.
And gas was significantly cheaper back then. But then he was like, dude, and I love that he was like, dude, when was the last time you bought a comic book? Do you know how expensive they are? And then his favorite book, Seance Dog, which is different. And I was like, that one kind of irked me. that was another one of the differences. Seance dog instead of science dog, and
Oh, I didn't
it,
even catch that.
oh yeah, yeah. When you see his room, there's a picture of
Hmm.
Seance dog and it's Science dog, but he's dressed like Doctor Strange. And then Mark points out, "He's like, dude, Seance dog is coming out twice a month," and um and I was like, I tell you, um back when I was collecting comics very regularly, I was upset when Amazing Spider-Man, when Brand New Day happened. For many reasons, I was upset, but I was upset because the only Spider-Man book that was going to come out was coming out 3 times a month. And
Yeah, that got very expensive.
I was like, oh man, and it was. Listen, whatever you say about Brand New Day, a lot of those story arcs were quite good.
Yeah. The problem
um,
is it came out 3 times a month.
Yeah, exactly. That was the problem.
Yeah.
So that's one of the other things. Then one of the other big changes is Amber. One
Mhm.
is that she's African American instead of white. And then also the other big change is that she's here from the beginning. Amber didn't come around until after Mark had met Eve and started his
Already, yeah, he was
superhero
already
career.
yeah, he was already a superhero by the time that Amber first really shows up.
And so that's one of the big changes. Um, and speaking of
And
that, uh,
and to be also honestly to speak about Amber a little bit too, is that she's going to get a little bit more fleshed out, and she's going to reflect high school students a little bit today, and how high school students are today. Um, so, and again, it's not that Amber was a bad character when she was in the comics. She was a reflection of high school girls at that time,
yeah,
and now
but she was also
when we
very two dimensional. She was there wasn't a lot of depth to her, and um, and and same with Debbie Grayson. Is the same way. I always felt Debbie was very flat, and as a character in the Invincible comics, and in this, she's much more fleshed out and a much better character in this show than she was in the comics. So both of them, I appreciate them getting fleshed out and developed more. And then the other one of the other big things is Mark getting his name of Invincible. Now Nolan is the one who gives it to him in the show, but in the comic, it's actually the principal, Reginald Val Johnson, or what was his character name?
it was principal is I believe if I remember right from the comic, it's Principal Winslow because the high
The high
school
school is Reginald
is
Val
Reginald Bell
Johnson.
Johnson High School,
That's right.
which I love that. I so love that high school is named after him. So one of the things too, this is just a nice little bit of trivia for if you're ever get into wanting to collect the comics, and especially if you collect them via the trades, so like collecting
Mm-hmm.
the story arc at a time, each of the story arcs or each of the trades is named after a different sitcom. I don't know what caused him to do that, or if he just thought it would be cool or fun. And which, by the way, I'm totally 100% behind that and find that. But you can definitely see he has a love for um, sitcoms and especially apparently Family Matters, because the principal is named and is used to reflect Reginald Vell Johnson, who played Carl Winslow from Family Matters. And there was, I don't think he shows up in the show, but in the comics, there was a classmate of theirs named Steve White,
Oh.
and and he was a play on Jaleel White slash Steve Urkel.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think they had him in the show.
I don't remember that. I mean, obviously, we're going to go through episode by episode. So if he comes up, we'll mention it.
Yeah.
And
But I just
so,
love that. Like as a when I first started getting into the comics, it was like, oh, that's totally Urkel, totally Urkel. And but anyway, so yeah, so there's that. there's these little things in there about the show that are just absolutely phenomenal, and they take from the comics, and so yeah, it's absolutely phenomenal stuff.
And then the last ones of the ones that we've caught is the death of the Guardians. That was the last. That's the one of the other big changes in this episode. One, the death of the Guardians didn't happen in the beginning. It was like issue 10 or something like that, where Omni-Man kills the Guardians, and so that's one of the big differences. The other big difference is that Omni-Man wipes the floor with them in the comics. Like it's like instantaneous. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment with Red Rush, because Red Rush is the MVP of this episode, especially the fight against Omni-Man.
He's the MVP of the fight. I would disagree on who the actual MVP of this particular episode is.
Fair enough.
Listen,
but he's definitely big Flash fan. Okay, I'm biased against speedsters.
All right, so we haven't delved into it a whole lot. So, but just for the people that are watching or listening to the podcast, and maybe you're just now thinking about getting into the Invincible show, or you're wanting to pick up the Invincible comics, the Guardians of the Globe are the Justice League, the Avengers of this version of Earth. One of the things that was very intentional on the part of Robert Kirkman when he created them was that they are very much rip-off / parodies of the Justice League. Because when they get introduced in the comic, it's the same comic that they die in. So Robert Kirkman did that intentionally to make them, like Red Rush is a play on the Flash. There's a character named Darkwing, and he is a play on Batman. There is, I don't remember what the name of the character is, but he's a Martian, so obviously a play on the Martian Manhunter. There is, I believe her name is it Warrior Woman or Power Woman? I think it's Warrior Woman, and she's a play on Wonder Woman.
Yeah, it's Warrior Woman.
Warrior Woman, and then there is, what's the name for the Green Lantern archetype? Is it Green Ghost?
That sounds right.
I could be wrong. I could be wrong on that, so don't quote me on the name for the Green Lantern. But she's this all green character, and she actually, in order to get her power, she has to swallow this like giant green pill, and then she turns into the Green Lantern. And then there's the Immortal, and he's supposed to kind of play on Superman. However, Omni-Man actually plays on the Superman archetype a little. In my personal opinion, Omni-Man plays on the Superman or archetype a little bit more than the Immortal does. But when you see the Immortal fight and that sort of stuff, you can kind of see that connection. But yeah, so, and one of the reasons why that Robert Kirkman made them such blatant copies of the Justice League is, well, I know I'm going to kill them, and I need you to care about them dying. So it needs to be like, oh my gosh, Superman just killed the Flash, which now with everything that's happened with Injustice, you don't, you're not quite as surprised that Superman going bonkers and killing everybody now. But at the time when this happened in Invincible, it was a huge shock, because it's like, oh my gosh, Invincible's dad is a murderer. And not only was he a murderer, it is a gruesome murder. Like he absolutely just smashes them. And it is not a pretty sight. And to give Red Rush's due, Omni-Man realized, like, I need to stop him, because Omni-Man wasn't doing anything. He wasn't doing squat towards the Guardians, because Red Rush was moving so fast, and he was moving them all out of the way of Omni-Man's attack. And so until he was able to stop Omni-Man, until Omni-Man was able to stop Red Rush, he couldn't do anything. And so major props to Red Rush. He made that a fight. And then things got bloody.
Oh yeah, very, very bloody. And so we didn't mention this in the beginning of the episode, but both the comic and the cartoon are extremely violent and filled with a lot of blood. And honestly, I mean, I'd have to go back and check it out, but I'm pretty sure that the same with the comic and the series is that the blood really starts, sorry for the pun, flowing. Um, sorry, not sorry. Uh, with the death of the Guardians, I'm pretty sure there was some blood before it, but it wasn't a whole lot. It wasn't like the hyper violence really doesn't kick in until after the death of the Guardians. Um, and so just be warned, this is not for children. Even though it is superheroes, and for the TV show, it's a cartoon. It is not for children. When you open it up on Amazon on Prime Video, it is listed as mature, and please listen to that rating. Uh,
And it's the same thing with the comics too. And it's not that every issue is filled with a ton of gore or mutilations from getting punched their getting their punch face, their face punched through. Oh my gosh. um but it does happen, and there is the potential for that. And so just please use your best judgment and um on what you can and can't handle, or for your children, please, take into account what they can and can't handle. uh, but it again, once you're able to handle it and appreciate it, it is a phenomenal series and definitely worth your time. Yeah, so those are kind of some of like the big changes that happen with this. And so now let's just go ahead and start talking about some of the stuff that we just really loved about the show, just in general.
yeah. So for us, or at least for me in particular, um, I really loved the security guard conversation in the beginning. And Jeff, I know how you feel about it, and I'll let you say your piece once, just once. um, I, being a pastor, being a dad, being a teacher, a mentor in so many different ways. Um, I really love the fact that this guard who is a stepdad to his stepson, and he was like, when that boy, crosses the stage and graduates, like, that's my boy. And that just made my heart warm, because he's talking about a kid who's not his, and wants to be there with him. And just, I always get, that stuff's always kind of a good way to get me like sappy and emotional, with those kind of things. uh, and I loved also that they talk about supervillain training. You know, they talk about, it's like, yeah, I remember back in the good old days, all we had to do training was, how do we deal if someone comes after you with a knife, if they come after you with your gun, that kind of thing. Now we have to do supervillain training. What am I supposed to do with someone who can kick a tank to the moon or can control minds? I was like, I'm just going to go. They basically just said that they're going to go like hide in the bush. And so I was like, I really appreciated that, because that's, in a superhuman society, what are police and security guards going to do against someone who can kick a tank to the moon, or they can control minds? I mean, unless they have the specific equipment to handle that, I mean, they might as well be throwing, it might as well be ants. So how do you feel about the security guard thing?
That was some of the worst 2.5 minutes of my life watching when I watched that first episode. Like I was in it. I was drawn in to watch the show regardless. I wanted to watch this because I love the comic. But this is how you open the show? 2.5 minutes of blech? Like I mean, seriously, it was so boring and pointless. Like, I get you needing to very quickly build the world, but first of all, this episode is an hour long. The world's going to get built, so you don't need to spend 2.5 minutes yapping. In all honesty, I really only think that this particular scene took 2.5 minutes because the voice of the stepdad is John Hamm. And I happened to catch that because I watching it through Amazon. They'll pop stuff up on from IMDb, and I was like, oh, that's John Hamm. Oh, maybe that's why they decided to almost kill most people's attention span with the show. And it's just like, I literally I sat through this episode a couple of times when it first came out because I wanted to get some of my friends to watch it. But when I watched it, I was like, oh my gosh, these people that have no ties to Invincible whatsoever, if they watch this, they're going to stop. They're not going to make it past this 2.5 minutes because they're going to get bored. And I mean, it's like, learn from Shakespeare, people. Shakespeare starts off every single one of his shows with one of three things: either a massive fight, something hot and sexy, or something with ghosts. Not two people yapping about nothing that literally does not do anything for you. It doesn't, like, like, I can understand they're wanting you to kind of feel a certain way about them, the security guards almost dying at the hands of the Mauler twins. I don't feel anything for them after that scene because you don't ever see them again. It's not worth it. And I think they do kind of, like, I think like the stepdad shows up, like they they have him open up a couple of more episodes or something like that. But again, it doesn't alter the story, the overall story of the show in the least. And so it's like, so in all honesty, skip the first 2 minutes of the show. If you haven't watched it yet already, skip it. It's not worth it. It's and you can quote me on that.
It's the frickety frack we do talk back take. One of the things I do agree with Jeff is that it could have been shorter. Like, when I
condense it to 30 seconds.
Yeah,
seriously,
still,
like, I would be okay with,
because you can still talk about the, man, what am I supposed to do against a guy who can kick a tank to the moon? Then in the bench and be like, my stepson's graduating. He's like, oh, how's that? I heard you at our time. It's like, oh, we had a rough patch, but we worked through it and it's great. And when he crosses that stage, I hope he knows he's my boy. Boom. You feel for the guards,
Yep. And then, oh crap, the Mauler twins.
Exactly. Because that's what we're here for.
Yep.
People arguing about who's the original clone.
Yeah. Oh, and I love the Mauler twins. They might be my absolute favorite villains in the entire run of Invincible. Oh, with the exception of maybe one, but no, I take it back. Two. There's two villains I put on top of the Mauler twins. But Mauler twins are solid number 3 for me. And I just absolutely
wait, which one? The original or the clone?
Yes. But yeah, no, I love the Mauler twins, and I love that they bicker back and forth as to who's the original. And I can't remember if they talk about this in this season. But one of the things that I love in the comics, one of the things that they do is it's like, oh yeah, and it's like, I know you're the clone because you don't have the nose ring piece. I did this to distinguish myself from you, my clone. And it's like, and then then his clone, then the other one argues back. It's like, how does that make any sense? You differentiate yourself from the clone? No, the original is the original. And it's just like they bicker back and forth the entire time. However, they're still very effective. And not only are they effective brutes, like they are super strong, they're actually intelligent too. They don't always act like it, but they're actually really smart.
Oh yeah.
And so this, like, they did genuinely create cloning technology. And so it's just they're lovable villains. Yes, they are despicable people, but man, you gotta love them, especially especially as you see them more and more throughout the series. And I do expect them to be back regularly, because they would always randomly kind of pop up again in the comic. And it's just, I always loved seeing them. Loved seeing them.
One of my favorite parts in the comic, and I don't think they touch on this in the series yet. I mean, obviously we'll find out once we get through it. But one of my favorite things that happens in the comic is that there actually ends up being a distinguishing factor between the original and the clone, and it completely kills their working relationship. Like, they get nothing done once they could tell, oh yeah, I'm the original, you are the clone. It was really crazy, and it just tickled me pink when they and how they resolve it. I won't spoil that part because it's great, and the comic handles it well, and I'd be interested to see what it does in the TV series later. And
Yeah, and I
so
just I just absolutely love the Mahler twins, and they do a phenomenal job. And so for me, one of the big things was the Taylor. And we already brought this up, but Mark Hamill voices Art, and he is the tailor to the superheroes, kind of like Edna Mode from Incredibles. He's, like Edna is the tailor to the superheroes in that world. Art is the tailor for the superheroes in this one, and voiced by Mark Hamill, and does an absolutely phenomenal job for such a small part. We get Mark Hamill, and one of the things that I really like about the scenes involving Art with the in terms of the costume is that the original costume that he tries to peddle on to Mark, this orange and yellow number, was the actual original design for Invincible. And actually the original name for the character was not Invincible, but was actually his superhero name was going to be Bulletproof. And so that costume makes an appearance in that part, and I absolutely, and I just love that it showed up. It was in the comic, and now it shows up in the series as well. Um, and yeah, so it was well done, and I just love that that those little notes there that we get to see come to life in the show. And so yeah, it's just I absolutely loved it. Love the interactions with the shop, and then Art also pulling out making a very good point. It's like, yeah, heroes they all want that iconic look. So you know how hard iconic is, and it's like, and then on top of it too, you say you want iconic, but you don't even know what your name is. So how am I supposed to build a costume for you and you don't know who you are? Um, but when it comes to an iconic superhero look, really, in all honesty, iconic is what you make of it. You could
Mhm.
have a very simple looking costume. Let's take Deadpool, for example. His costume, for the most part, is relatively simple looking, and it does steal a little bit from Spider-Man. But it's not a super complicated or very intricate costume, but it's iconic. It's iconic because of him as the character. And so it's like even the same thing with Superman. Superman's costume is not that elaborate. It's a
Yeah.
blue, red, and
the
yellow.
the Flash.
The Flash is a very simple costume, but it's iconic because of the character. And so it's the same thing with the costume. It's like, yeah, you can have a somewhat like kind of dull looking costume or whatever, but if you are iconic, then your costume becomes iconic.
Yeah. And so one of the things that I appreciate about Invincible is that they help you live in a superhero world and really kind of do that. Like, and one of the throwaway comments is when uh, Mark and Debbie are talking about Omni Man saving the president and keeping the Mahler twins from destroying the White House, and they're like, "Oh yeah, hey, Dad's in D.C. Dad saved the president." And they're like, "Oh," and and Debbie's like, "Oh, okay, whatever, no big deal." And then he's like, "Yeah, this is a big deal. Look, the Guardians are there." It's like, "Oh, well, okay." And it doesn't even phase her. And I'm just like, "Oh, that's awesome." It was like, and then my favorite comment about the whole thing, she's like, "Oh, who cares? They rebuild the White House twice a year." It's like, I don't even think the president lives there anymore. And I mean, that's just great stuff. And I mean,
And
honestly,
see,
if
and
it,
that is and see, that's a great example of world building
mhm.
with that you can help build the world and help understand the world without being like so open about it or being so on the nose with it with just these simple little conversations. You know what you learn in those comments, that Debbie's been with Nolan for a while and she's kind of used to the superhero thing, and so the fantastic elements of this doesn't really affect her all that much. World building, character building. Oh, and hey, by the way, you know what, the president probably doesn't even live in the White House anymore because he gets attacked all the time. So it's just there for appearances. Again, world building, character building. First 2.5 minutes of the show did not have to happen.
Eh, you broke the rule, buddy.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Hey, you started it because you brought it up. Okay. You want to talk about world building? I'm going to talk about when it does it great. And the rest of the episode does a great job building the world. And the first 2.5 minutes did it absolutely nothing. Nothing for me.
All
They
right.
failed on the first 2.5 minutes of the episode.
The official Frack or Frick uh, opinion of the first 2.5 minutes of Invincible. Um,
The true highlight of this episode is um the parent relationships with Mark. The
mhm.
absolutely phenomenal. Both of them, both Omni Man / Nolan and Debbie interacting with Mark throughout this episode is the true highlight for me. And in fact, maybe even a little bit more towards Debbie than to Debbie, even over Nolan. Even up until he wipes out the Guardians of the Globe. I almost call them the Justice League. That just um, the parenting moments in this are just absolutely phenomenal, and this is just and again it just shows how they're very with the show. They're trying to and this is from the comics as well. They're trying to take as grounded uh, grounded world to it as possible with dealing with people with superpowers. Um, Honestly, Invincible I think is the second best in terms of how the world would react to superheroes. Honestly, the best is The Boys. The Boys might be the most accurate depiction of how superhero life might actually be, especially if superheroes went corporate. Um, but anyways, it's Invincible is well done in like how the world probably would genuinely react to superheroes. One of my favorite issues in all of the Invincible is when they talk about how these huge superhero fights, when they just like completely wipe out a city, how it impacts normal people, the people that kind of get caught in the crosshairs. And it's just something that and I'm sure we'll eventually get to that in the show, but it is one of my favorite issues in the comics, and I do hope that they do eventually adapt that issue into an episode or part of an episode, just so it honors something that is truly something that we don't think about a whole lot. And it's the first time that I had ever really considered that with a superhero comic. I don't think I'd ever really considered it before. It's like, oh yeah, you wipe out a city and it kills a bunch of people, or you do all this, like you might be trying to stop this villain that's trying to kill a whole bunch of people, but you know what, you might wind up killing a bunch of people in the process as well. uh, so anyways, it's just the parent, sorry, and I got sidetracked there a little bit, but to get back to the point, the parenting moments are just very grounded and just really great on like when you're having to try and talk to your kid that has superpowers. And like, for instance, for me, one of the moment that really struck a chord with me was when Debbie was confronting Mark about his powers a little bit, and the fact that Mark was up late, because he was really struggling with his landing. And so when she keeps hearing these loud thuds, and she goes out and check it back, and she sees these huge holes in their backyard because Mark is trying to practice his landing. And she tells him, like, "Hey, Mark, you should really go to bed. It's late. You've got school in the morning." And he bowls up to her and is just like, "Make me." And so she just looks at him kind of cockeyed a little bit and is just like, "Does that make you feel strong?" And it's kind of like, what? And it's just like, yeah, so I can't do anything to you physically. And to be honest, he's a 17-year-old kid. Before that, anyway, she probably couldn't really do a whole lot to him physically, anyways. But now he's got all these superpowers. He's, trying to man up in front of her. And it's just like, does this make you feel strong? Does it make you feel powerful that I can't physically do anything for you? And it's just like, and she reminds him, it's like, I'm still your mother. And it's just like, there used to, up until this moment, up until these last couple of days, it's always been you and me, and then your dad, because your dad was Omni Man. He was lived in almost this completely different world, and so we would be sitting talking, and we'd be having our moments. And she opened up to Mark and just said, "It's like, hey, I'm going to be scared you're going to forget about me and not utilize me anymore, because now I'm boring, non-powered mom, and you're super powered like your dad. Don't, and so, and then he admits to his mom, Mark admits to his mom, yeah, the reason why he's acting like he is that he's scared, and he's nervous about the fact that if he's going to be able to measure up to his dad, because his dad is the greatest superhero in the world. And so what's so touching about it is that, it's like, and she just is just she just hits it out of the park as a mom, and it's just like, you just need to be the best you that you can be, and then and that's all you can be. And Mark just comes back, she's like, well, if that's enough, and she just, and again, just nailing it as a mom, telling us like, how can you being the best you that you can be not be enough? And so it's just these great moments between Mark and his mom, right, just in those moments of just like remembering why he's doing what he's doing. And it's like, and he doesn't need to feel like he's not enough just because he's not a superhero or whatever. And it's these great moments like this.
One of the things that um, is a, I did figure out about one thing that's a little bit different in this than this comics is that Mark is not good at this from the get go. Um, we talked about in the synopsis that when he first flies, he almost passes out from lack of oxygen, or I guess he does pass out from lack of oxygen when he hits the atmosphere and doesn't get out of space. Um, and he's having trouble landing, and his fight wasn't that great. Like his first fight as a superhero. That's one of those things where it's kind of like, you know, I appreciate that because from the comics, he was basically, you know, one of the shows that Jeff and I both love is My Hero Academia. And when we look at one of the things in My Hero Academia is the pro hero rankings. So the world's greatest hero is All Might. He's ranked number one. There's literally a whole thing. He's the number one hero. And number two hero is Endeavor. And um, and so that means he's the second best hero in the entire world. And one of the things that in the comic, it basically goes, it's Omni Man is the greatest hero on Earth, and then it's you could take your pick, maybe the Immortal, Atomy, whoever. But then once Mark gets his power, he's like almost immediate. He's basically number two from the get go, and where that is, even though he's extremely powerful, I don't know if that would really be the way it works because of lack of experience, lack of control, those kind of things. And I really appreciate that about this is that they really show him struggling to be a hero and getting into the game.
Well, and then on top of it too, you get to see more of the training that Nolan does with Mark. And so, like, in all honesty, my favorite scene overall in the show in this first episode is when Mark and Nolan are literally throwing a baseball. They're playing catch, but in order to make catch effective for these two, they're literally throwing the ball around the planet. And so they're flying, they're floating up in the sky. They have their backs towards each other, and they're throwing the ball back and forth. And it's just, they have some really good conversation. Mark talks to his dad about some of the stuff that he talked with his mom about. He's scared, he's nervous about being good enough and that sort of stuff. And Nolan does a great job of comforting him. And again, it's what causes his name to come about. It's just like, because it's very true. Like as somebody that coaches teenagers, coaches people that are Mark's age in the show, yeah, they definitely feel like they're invincible. They do a whole lot of stupid stuff. It's like, oh my gosh, you're gonna get yourself killed.
Yeah.
You would think that more teenagers would die based off of the stupid stuff they do, myself included. I remember some of the stupid stuff that we tried to do when we were teenagers, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm really surprised we didn't die.
Or at least get more injured more
Yeah, or
often.
more injured. Yeah, more injured might be more accurate. But anyway, but regardless, so it's just, again, it's these great little like moments like that they have between father and son, and obviously with Mark getting the superpowers, and a good portion of this episode dealing with the training, were just really great moments. And it was one of the things too that, like, this was a really, I think this was really powerful when Nolan punched Mark. You know, um, it was a very honest reaction for him. Because it's like, I don't know how the discipline went for him as a kid or whatever, but like from Patrick and I's childhood, we were spanked as kids. If we messed up, we got spanked. Um, I can honestly say it didn't happen a lot because we didn't do a whole lot to deserve getting spanked or punished in general. Um, but we did get spanked. But it would have been a real shock to me if when I was 17 years old, if our dad had legitimately punched me. Um, it would have affected me quite a bit. And so like the fact that Mark got punched and it scared him. And he admitted to his dad after he put on the costume, that homemade makeshift costume at first was, he was scared. And he told his dad, it's like, that scared me because you never hit me before. Or, and if he did get spanked as a kid or whatever, I'm sure what he meant is like legitimately hit me.
Yeah.
It wasn't like we weren't sparring or anything like that. You punched me and it hurt. And so now, but then, then he needed to prove himself. He wanted to prove himself to his ass. Like, no, I wasn't ready that time, but I'm ready now. Really punch me. I want you to punch me. And he says that to him. And so it's these great little moments that are just like, I feel like very genuine reactions as to how people would react in these situations. I just genuinely love this a lot.
I mean, I mean, we can go on and on about this episode, and this episode, our personal episode, is probably going a little long. So let's go ahead and go into the biblical theme. And the biblical theme that we chose is along these lines of training and raising up. It's Proverbs 22:6. It says, "Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it." And so this, because the main focus of this episode is either Nolan or Debbie educating or having parent child talks with him, getting him ready for this life that he wants to do of being a hero. And so, Nolan is training him how to have his powers, and Debbie's reminding him, don't forget what it's like to be a person. And so that's just one of those things that's just really kind of important for a superhero in those things, is that they can't, they can't just be above everyone and expect to be a good hero, where a person who connects with the people will make their job more effective. And so we as Christians and those who follow Jesus Christ, one of the things that we are called to do as in ministry, but we're each one of us is called as Christians is to disciple others. And you might be saying, like, well, I'm not ready to disciple anyone. I'm not saying you should, but maybe you might be in a season of your life where you are the one being discipled. There's nothing wrong with that, none whatsoever. And but there will come a time when God's going to call you, and He's going to be like, Patrick, I need you to disciple some people. They're coming your way. And I'll be like, okay, God. And I might squirm, I might get uncomfortable, but I'm a pastor. I kind of come with the territory. Um, but and so I love this part in this proverb. It says, "And when he is old, he will not depart from it." So when you are training and when you are teaching, Mark is learning these lessons to live this life of a superhero, where we as Christians are called to live the life of a Christian, not just on Sundays, not just on at Bible studies or Sunday school or at church, but in every time and in every moment of our day, it is to be in life with Christ, and train people up to do it like this, and so that when they are old, and when they basically, the idea they kind of look at it is, once someone has come out from underneath your wings of being your disciple, that they will not depart from the teachings of the gospel of Jesus, of the Bible, so that they can then train others to keep passing on the word. And that's why it's so important to do these kind of things, like um, training and discipling.
So one of the things that I really like about this verse, and it's something that I very strongly believe, is that just kind of what Patrick's talking about it. I differ a little bit in this view. I personally think that you should always be discipling somebody, and there should always be somebody that's discipling you. Um, Now, sometimes, especially as you get older, it might be harder to find somebody that has that can mentor you. But that doesn't mean somebody younger than you can't mentor you and teach you new things and help you grow in your walk or challenge you to
I
help
do
you to
agree with
grow.
that.
So it's something that I personally strongly believe when it comes to your faith is that if you're going to want to get better, you need to be doing two things. One, you need to be discipling and mentoring somebody, and you need to be discipled and mentored. This is honestly, though, this is something that's harder for men. It just is. Um, it's something that I have always struggled to find and to see in other people in my days in ministry, and it's something that is a very common thing that, although men might not necessarily bring it up, but it is a recognized problem amongst men uh, in churches. Is that, for the most part, and honestly, as awful as it sounds, people don't really care. Um, Women are much better at this. Women do a much better of flocking to the younger women and helping them and encouraging them and helping them to grow. So it's just that natural maternal instinct. But men, we need to have that natural paternal instinct and look after the younger guys and look and help them and teach them and help them grow up. And so it's the same thing. Um, but again, it's something that just doesn't happen as frequently, and it's a shame. I know for me, I am not a father, but I've been I was a minister for about 10 years, and I do coach high school kids. And so one of the things that always made me feel better, especially like during my ministry days when I would teach them something. And honestly, one of the things that can be really challenging sometimes is when you're talking to somebody, are they actually listening to them? So it's just and but then when they repeat something that you said to them and you didn't think they were listening, and then they applied a lesson that you're teaching them, and they learned it, it's very rewarding. It's the same thing with my coaching. I coach swimming and water polo, and so I'll harp on them about certain things and trying to help them get better as swimmers or water polo players, and I keep teaching them. And so when they finally do it right, it's so rewarding. And so it's the same thing when it comes to our faith. We need to take those opportunities, that when there are people in our lives, that if there's stuff that you can pass along or you can teach, do it. Teach them, help people grow, and help people understand the world that's around them, and how they can be effective and what can help them. And so it's just something that's so important. I feel like for us as Christians, as men and women of God, is that we need to find the people that need the help and teach them and raise them. This doesn't apply to just children or your own physical, uh, biological, adopted children, whatever. Uh, this is definitely something that can happen in more than just that. And I strongly encourage you guys to do that, to find if you don't have somebody that mentors you, find somebody. And it's one of the great things about the internet these days with social media and all of its various forms. It's much easier to keep in communication with people than it's ever been. Uh, we're literally just a couple of clicks away on a phone or a computer or whatever, and you can communicate with somebody instantaneously. So there's no reason to not have that in your life. All right, Frack, how would you rate this episode?
So this is a really great episode, and other than the 2.5 minutes that shouldn't be there in the beginning, um, or at least shortened to 30 seconds, I would give this episode a 4.5. And honestly, the only knock is that really long, drawn out 2.5 minute discussion that didn't really need to be there. Other than that, like if that didn't happen, this episode would be like a 5 for sure, because it did a great job introducing us to the world of Invincible and um, and life there. And I mean, the animation's great, the voice cast is great. Uh, the changes were good. Uh, so it's a 4.5 episode for sure. if it didn't have a really long opening.
I would give this a 4.25. I'd penalize it more for that first 2.5 minutes than he does. Because, and again, there's just so much, like, we didn't even talk about everything that was just great about this episode. Like, for instance, Red Rush and the sympathy pukers. Oh my gosh, when he rescues all those people from the White House and you know, super speeds them away, and the last person he saves is like, "Bruh, bruh," and then pukes. He's like, no, don't do that. If you do that, then everybody's gonna puke. And that's what happens, is that everybody else he rescued puke, including Red Rush. Red Rush puke too. And so it's just these great little moments. And then the other thing too, with the Immortal, when right before he got called into the Guardians of the Globes, he was fighting this villain that was flying around with a jetpack, and he was about to blow up what city was he about to blow up? Denver. Yeah, he's about to blow up Denver. And so he just grabs him and throws him to space. He's like, all right, when in doubt, throw him into space. So true. So very, very true. And it's like, in all honesty, that's actually the argument that I make about anytime somebody argues, well, who would win in a fight, Superman or the Hulk? Superman, because Superman can fly. And all he has to do is he needs to grab him and hold on to him and then take him to space and leave him behind. And there you go. Superman wins. That's the answer. For anybody that's keeping track of who wins between Superman and Hulk, here you have the official Frick judgment on that, and then it is Superman. And it's for that very simple reason. All he's got to do is grab a hold of him and take him to space, and that's it. He's done. So just these great little moments. If the first 2.5 minutes didn't happen, then I would put it probably up to a 4.5 or 4.75. It's just a great episode, and it's a great start to a new season, to a series. And if you haven't checked out Invincible yet, please do so, especially because there are rumors that they are in the process of making a live action movie as well.
Yeah. So anyone with questions for us about biblical lessons that we talked about in this episode, or other discussion ranging from anime, comics, or just anything in general, feel free to email us at frickityfracktalkback@gmail.com, or reach out to us on Twitter at frickityf, or at frickityfrack on Instagram and Facebook. Know that we love you. Most importantly, God loves you. So let's go put some pants on and let's get into the sky.